Welcome into a special Inside Carolina series of shows. Shout out to Sherrell McMillan for wanting us to do these because he's absolutely right. If you are a friend of Inside Carolina and you're subscribed to Inside Carolina, obviously if you're not now, you need to go to InsideCarolina.com, sign up, get in the new digs at On 3, same content, same great staff. And we're about to show you that with these shows. But Sherrell thought we should do the scouting reports like Jason Staples and yours truly do on football. And we did a ton of them over the summer, and everybody was like, yeah, why not? Let's do it. And so here we are scouting North Carolina's basketball team ahead of the schedule was released last week. The season starts before you know it. We're going to go position by position, player by player, break it down, however deep in the weeds these guys want to get, because this is as much as I'm going to talk the entire show. Shout out to Rob Harrington, Sherrell McMillan, and Evan Rogers for joining me on this one. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. What we're going to do, who, how, skill set, and anticipated role for each player. I'm going to get it started really quickly. Rob Harrington's the old head, but the newest involved in these coast-to-coast / basketball regular shows. Isaiah Dennis, 6'4" freshman, Rob. You got your time in, drop the knowledge on him. Tell us what to expect, who he is, what to expect, and what his skill set is for this North Carolina team.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Isaiah Dennis arrived in Chapel Hill without the accolades that some of the more recent Hubert Davis guards arrived with, like Elliot Cadeau and Ian Jackson. But nevertheless, I like him as a multi-year player. You have to caveat that, of course, he has to want to stay multiple years, but I think that he will be a good player. My first impression watching him, just watching clips, was that, oh, this is Jack Emanuel reincarnated. He's a skinny, good loping athlete who isn't super explosive above the rim like Jackie. He also leans forward on his jump shot. It's a push, low release shot, also like Jackie, with a little bit of a funky spin. And so I came away initially thinking that he was a non-shooter. But then I watched more and more of his clips. I watched whole games, and I was like, actually, no, the release is something that he needs to tweak. But he has good touch, and I think he will become a at least a credible long range shooter over time. I think in the first instance, he needs to get a lot stronger. This year for him, this next 12 months, not even just the basketball season, I think the critical issue for him would just put on some weight and get stronger, because he's going to have to stand up to the rigors of major college basketball on both ends. I think the first place that he will make a real contribution probably is on defense, because he has quick feet. Like I said, he's angular like Jackie. I don't know if he is quite as long as that, with as long as legs. But I think that he in time will become a good defensive player. And that's an area where, the Tar Heels have not been consistent during the Hubert Davis era. So I'm excited about him from that point of view. Offensively, I could see him being 2 years away, because I think he, in addition to the things we highlighted, like his strength, probably needing to refine his jump shooting mechanics, he also needs to improve as a ball handler. Certainly as a two guard and playing for Hubert Davis, presumably he will be on the ball some. He'll need to be able to play off of high screens. I don't think he's there yet. And I think that probably, as much as anything else, is why he wasn't ranked more highly than he was. I can't remember where he finished. Sherrell, you may know, but what top 50 to 60 range, something like that. And I think that's about right. It's not a guarantee that it'll work out for him at UNC. We don't sugarcoat like that. But I think he has real promise. And I think that he complements the types of guards they've been bringing in under Hubert.
One thing that's interesting, Rob, and I'm going to kick you, Derek Dixon, as well, is 6'4" and 6'5" for these guys. Hubert Davis talked about the need to get bigger in the offseason. Obviously that means in the front court and all that. They lacked that size last year. But these are tall guards, and Dixon's up next for you. He's another guy in that mold. He seems a little more ready than Dennis does to produce or to be effective at this level. But your take on Dixon?
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm a little bit skeptical of those heights. I think there may be an inch of inflation there, but I don't think it's a gross exaggeration. I think Dennis is more college ready. The thing I like about, Dixon. The thing I like about Dixon is the same thing I liked about Joel Berry. Not saying they're the same player, different styles, but Joel Berry was very compact and he didn't waste motion. He didn't use a lot of dribbles. And that always hindered his stats playing AAU because a lot of guys are just going to play with the ball, dribble it around, wait for some opening, and they have all day to do it. And when they get to college, of course, you have to be much more decisive and get right into your stuff. And that's a big adjustment for them. Joel Berry was made for structure because he was very economical with his dribble. I see the same thing in Dixon. Again, different styles, but I think his economy of dribbling, his efficient style, that will translate to college. And so some of these guys, you might say, well, he's not super creative as a scorer or a ball handler. I don't think that's necessarily a weakness for someone who plays the way that he does, because they won't be asking him to do what Elliot Cadeau did. That's not his job. What he will do is he'll stretch the court. He'll find seams and defenses. And I think he can do it some as a freshman. I think he'll shoot pretty well as a freshman. That's one thing that encouraged me last year, is as disappointing as it was for Ian Jackson, especially, he shot really well and Drake Powell shot well, certainly better than you would expect from most freshmen. So I'm hoping that trend continues for Dixon, who, by the way, worth mentioning, has excellent AAU pedigree, played for a great program. So he's played with and against really top guys on the Nike circuit. And I think that will help him too.
Sherrell, I want to bring you in here on the recruiting aspect. Rob mentioned the rankings or whatever, and quite frankly, the rankings to me don't mean a whole lot unless you're talking about the guys that are at the top of it. But when you look at Dennis and Dixon, your opinion on their recruitment to get them to Carolina and their readiness from what you've seen following them all through their high school career, and then this past summer, hearing about them in camp and all that, working on it. What do you have to say there to Rob's point about the recruiting side and the heights and all that stuff?
I think the first thing is, with rankings, we have to be very clear about what they are. So the guys, and Rob is someone who used to rank people. The goal is you're ranking a first round of the NBA draft. That's what it's supposed to be. So if a player is number one in a class, then he should be the number one pick in that first eligible draft. That's what they are. They're not college impact rankings, which are very, very different, because Derek Dixon, where they're a college impact ranking, his ranking would be much higher than a first round NBA draft projection ranking. So I think that's the first thing that we need to make clear, is that Dixon is someone who I think everyone is expecting to come in and play meaningful minutes and play significant minutes and be really a key piece of Carolina's team next year in this backcourt rotation that we're going to talk about. So Rob's point about his pedigree is important, because he's a guy, it sounds cliche, but he's won at every level. In high school, he plays in one of the toughest conferences in the country. For AAU, again, he plays for Team Takeover, which every year is one of the best grassroots programs in the country. And they play a certain style that is not as free as, I would say, the rest of grassroots basketball. They play with a little bit more structure than a lot of teams. So he's got all that working for him. From a recruiting perspective, Carolina identified him about a year and a half ago. He was actually one of the later offers in the class for Carolina, as they were looking for guards. But I think they liked his moxie, his ability to knock down shots. That really was kind of the impetus for the whole recruitment, is that he's a shooter. And then I think as they watched him more, they're like, oh, he's someone who could eventually play with the ball in his hands a lot more than he did in high school and in AAU. So that's really kind of, I think, where the Dixon stuff came from, and why they were so eager to get him on campus, and why he's been impressing so much this offseason. He's kind of gotten the Kobe White treatment of like, maybe not a one and done or anything like that, but as the player, you're like, oh man, hearing a lot about Kobe White that summer before he came in and played. I guess it was last year. It was, oh man, Seth Trimble is playing really well, and each year it seems to back up. So he's kind of that candidate, I think, for player who's had a really good summer, who can take it over into the season.
That is Isaiah Dennis and Derek Dixon. Sherrell dropping Kobe White when he's talking about Derek Dixon. You're gonna have a lot of people
okay.
up.
Let's back up. Let's back up. Let me be clear in what I'm saying. It's just that summer, everybody was talking about Kobe White. No matter who we talked to that was connected to the program, was like, Kobe White is so good. He's going to start. He's going to be the guy. I'm not saying that Dixon is a commensurate basketball player or he's at that level or he's going to be a one and done. Just that as you talk to people, Caleb Wilson, who we'll talk about in another one of these, and Derek Dixon are two of the names that always come back as, look out for that guy or watch out or he's playing really well. So kind of who people are talking about, not necessarily one-to-one or anything like that. So I want to be very, very clear there.
Man, folks need to pick up what Sherrell McMillan's putting down right there when he's talking about freshman guards from North Carolina. We're talking with Sherrell, Rob Harrington, Evan Rogers, scouting UNC's guards here on this, I guess, 3-episode series of shows. We're going to drop it Inside Carolina over the next couple of weeks. You're getting this one on September 16th. You'll get a couple more as we get closer to the season. Next up, probably I don't know. We can talk about it towards the end of the show, but I think this one guy might have the most pressure on him of any of these guys on Carolina's roster now, and that's Kyan Evans, Colorado transfer, junior, 6'2", from watching him play some this summer. That I guess 6'2" is accurate. I guess we'll see once he's lined up and out on the court against other guys. But Evan Rogers, you've got Mr. Evans.
Yeah, kind of like you mentioned, I'm not sure if the 6'2" is fully legit, but I do think he has some pretty good just length to him. You can kind of see there was, I think, one dunk he had last year in transition where you wouldn't expect a guy at his height necessarily to make that, and he kind of flushed it down easy. But the thing with Kyan, I think that really, really comes to mind is just he's an efficient scorer, and that's something he really showed toward the end of last season. If you go back and look, I think from February on, he shot over 50% from three. And then from March on, in those key crunch time games, he shot over 60% from three. So he really came into his own as a scorer. And the thing with Kyan that I think all UNC fans or anyone who's interested in this program is kind of his development as a playmaker, because that's what UNC's brought him in to be. I mean, if you listen to any of people who talk about him or people who know the program, or even hearing Kyan Evans talk on, like the Carolina Insider podcast, or just in speaking, the first words that come out of his mouth are lead guard. He's coming to UNC to have the ball in his hands, to be the point guard for this team. And to put it kind of clear, he's never had that in his college career. Last year, it was Neat Clifford, who was kind of the lead initiator for Colorado State. And Neat Clifford is an NBA talent who was a first-round draft pick. And then when Kyan was a freshman, he didn't really play much because he was behind Isaiah Stevens, who was Colorado State's all-time leading scorer. So it's a new role for him to kind of see how does he adjust to having the ball more in his hands and maybe being a little bit more ball dominant. How that actually translate, I don't really know. I don't know if anyone knows, to be honest. He did struggle with turnovers at times. He had a higher turnover rate than you would like for someone who you want to be your lead guard. But I think the one thing that this staff knows and what UNC fans can expect is the shooting should be able to translate. It's a really fluid shot. Again, he shot it at a super high clip. Most of his looks did come from the catch and shoot. He did show some of the ability to create off the dribble, especially at the end of the season when he had that good stretch, especially in March Madness and stuff. But he's a player that, yeah, like you said, Tommy, I think a lot hinges on his development just as an overall player and his development into a new role. Because even though he is coming in as a junior, he really didn't play his freshman year. And then again, he didn't break out really until about the last 2 months of last season. So there still could be a lot of room for growth in terms of just, what he could become eventually. But I think the one thing that you can be certain is you are getting a guy who is an efficient scorer, especially a really good shooter. I think that's something they're really banking on Kyan Evans to be, is that efficient shooter. You're talking 38, 39% from three even. And overall, just a guy who could not necessarily lead the offense, but just be maybe one of those key initiators for this team.
Kyan Evans, Colorado State transfer. Moving on down the line, another transfer, this time from in the ACC, Jaydon Young. This will be Sherrell's guy, 6'4", 200. He looks like he's probably that size from seeing him in person and seeing him in play. But Sherrell Young comes in from Virginia Tech, which I'm an old head. All these interconference transfers or intra-conference transfers are still weird to me, but Young comes over from Virginia Tech. Your thoughts on him? he's another guy that's going to provide a little more size than Carolina's used to having in the backcourt, at least the last couple of years.
Well, some story time since you mentioned intra-conference transfers. It was about, I guess, 8 years ago. Had our first daughter, and I'm sitting on my laptop, and we find out that Cam Johnson is very interested in coming to UNC, and he was at Pittsburgh at the time. And just thinking about that, they were trying to make him sit out for 2 years because it was an intra-conference transfer. That was 8 years ago. And now we have players who transferred from in football who left one school, went to another, and went back to the same school in the same semester. So that tells you the rate of change within the last decade, in college sports in general. But Young, yeah, he played for Virginia Tech. They were not a good team. Frankly, his numbers weren't great. If you look at some of his advanced numbers in conference play in ACC games, he took not far from 28% of all available shots for Virginia Tech when he was on the court. But he only shot 44% from the field in those games and 31% from three. So took a lot of shots, did not make a lot of shots. Now, granted, I think a lot of that had to do with him being kind of forced into being the guy on a team. And frankly, just as a sophomore, he wasn't ready for that. I don't know if he'll ever be ready for that. But what he's going to do at Carolina, I think, and one of the reasons he's at Carolina is because he loves Carolina. So for those who haven't followed the story, he left Virginia Tech and went into the portal. Excuse me. And then after he left Virginia Tech, he committed to High Point because he wanted to stay near home. And High Point, has a lot. Let's put it that way. Charlotte's got a lot, so does High Point. And so they made it worth his while to go to High Point. And the plan was to kind of help build the roster around him. And then basically what happened is the coach decided to leave and be the coach in waiting at Creighton. They hired a new guy, and the new guy's vision of what Jaydon was going to be at High Point didn't align with Jaydon's. And so I think UNC had conversations with him, during that time, and he was interested, and they really wanted someone to come in who could develop for a couple of years, but also someone who had some experience. And that's how, he ended up at Carolina. It was a surprise to a lot of people. And, his role for this team, I think, is going to be at best, the fourth guard. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially for someone who has shown himself capable in ACC play, whether it's on a bad team or not, of, scoring 20, 25 points in a game. That's something. It's not efficient. It's not great, but it's something. And it's better than a lot of teams' fourth guard. So I think that is his role, is to help push Dixon and Evans and Trimble in practice and kind of be that, break glass in case of emergency guy. If there's a game where Kyan Evans gets 2 fouls in the first 2 minutes, or, Seth Trimble fouls out or something like that, kind of steady the ship, come in, do your job. What do we always talk about, Tommy? Not be a net negative. Kind of be that person. I think that is the role he has for this team. His shooting, like I said, is not been great, so that needs to improve. He's got the size, though, he could be a tight end if he really wanted to be. I think he's a well-built kid. So he's got that going for him. The ball handling is okay. I think he rates pretty highly, actually, in pick and roll. It's just he didn't handle the ball much as a pick and roll handler last season. So all that to say, I think it's he's a good pickup for UNC. He's someone that will give them added depth, and that's something that at times throughout the roster last year they didn't have. So as your fourth guard, you can certainly do a lot worse.
Stay right here, Sherrell. Let me ask you about, you mentioned being a decent player or a good player on a bad team. How important is it for guys to have experience? You play for Virginia Tech. That means you played against Duke. You played against Carolina, Louisville, all the good teams, and everywhere else around. How important is it to regardless of how well you played, to have played against tough teams, tough competition, when you're talking about stepping up to Carolina's level? And even though they're still in the same conference, Carolina's level is a little bit different than Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech fans, please don't. I hope you're not watching this. But that the thought there that maybe that experience at Virginia Tech will help him, of course, be a better player for Carolina, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think there's a question about it, honestly. If you look at every one of the teams who have won championships over the last few years, there's been, and again, I'm not saying that Carolina's going to win a championship. I'm not saying that Jaydon Young is going to be that guy, but they've all had kind of a, let's call him a upperclassman, journeyman type player, type guard who can come in, make a big shot or get a big stop or grab a big rebound. You have to have someone like that on your team. And the fact that he's done it at a high level against good teams, I think like I said, it says a lot about him and his ability. And, that can only help, especially for the younger guards, because they're going to be going up against someone who's, again, for the fifth time, who's done it multiple times in the ACC. That can only help them. And then for Hubert Davis, he doesn't really have to, I don't think he's going to have to worry about Jaydon Young being excited or energetic or coming out lethargic or worrying about classes or anything like that, because he's already experienced it. So it's not new for him. So yeah, I think that kind of stuff is invaluable. And I think you always need to have, if not one, two guys like that on your team who kind of been the wily vet to understand what it takes, the rigors of the ACC day in and day out.
You answered the question better than I asked it, but so I appreciate you bailing me out. You got the assist, you got the hockey assist and the regular assist. Rob, you got something before we move on?
Yeah, I wanted to backtrack for a second because this has been on my mind the last month or so as I've watched more clips of these guys. Question for the group: do you think that Kyan Evans and Derek Dixon are complementary or duplicative? If they are duplicative, can they play together for how long, or do they have to be paired with Young or Seth Trimble, for example? I don't know, because I do feel like Evans and Dixon do have some similar limitations. On the other hand, if they both shoot it really well, you can probably scheme around that, but of course they would have to scheme around that. So it raises other questions. I just don't know yet. At least for me, it's not clear, for all the other, we don't know anything about them individually, but we also don't know about those two, especially as a pair. And so I'm curious what you guys think about how they might synergize.
Rel can answer it probably better than I can, but having the opportunity to watch them this summer, not necessarily on the same team, but the size difference is noticeable. So while they may be a similar player, I don't know if they're totally duplicative. It's not like having RJ and Elliot Cadeau on the court, if that makes any sense. You have two small guards. At least with Evans and Dixon, you have some size difference. They can guard different players and all that. At least defensively, I think they could work well together. Offensively, Sherrell, what do you think?
Yeah, I think offensively, anytime you have two guys who have pedigrees as shooters, as you said, Rob, is going to make things a little bit easier. Their skills actually are, I would say, they're similar. I don't want to say duplicative, just because um, I think Dixon in high school and in AAU, he actually played a lot of lead guard, and it just didn't look like it because he had a shorter player beside him who did some of the initiation. So if you've got Nick Lewis, who I forget where I think he ended up at VCU, but he's a really small, 5'10", 5'11", but kind of looks like your traditional point guard. I think people assume that because sometimes Lewis would bring the ball up, that Dixon wasn't necessarily making the reads or initiating offense or anything. So I actually think Dixon has more of an ability at the moment, and just in my opinion, from playing in that strong league in the DC area, and then playing grassroots with EYBL, of being a primary initiator. I think just from what I've seen, obviously he hasn't done it against college level players like Dixon has, but he's just got a little more point guard instinctualism, if that's the word. Point guard instincts. Instinctualism is not a word. Just strike that from the record. Point guard instincts is what I would call it, as far as making the correct reads and talking to his coaches, AU coaches, high school coaches, trainers, all that good stuff. They all rave about how he makes the simple play, how he doesn't try to do anything that isn't there. And for me, that is one of the ultimate signs of a point guard, is that you're not trying to make something that's not there. You're looking, you're seeing, and you're doing. That's very important. And with Evans, we just don't know, because he's, again, as Evan said, he had Nick Clifford beside him. Is he capable? I think so. We'll see. We don't really know, but a long way to answer. Similar skills, but I don't think quite duplicative. And like you said, if they're both shooters, does it matter?
Well, can either of them play vertically? I guess that's the limitation that I think they may share is can either of them beat a guy and get into the paint and then make a play? Because for all of his shortcomings and the talk about Elliot Cadeau, like that was definitely a thing that he could do, is he could always beat his guy and he could get into the lane and do something. If they don't have that dimension from those two, does even more of the onus fall on Seth Trimble, whom we'll get to, or can they just design around the fact that, hey, we have two really good shooters and we're going to force the defense to stretch out so far that it's going to open up more space than these guys would have otherwise? I don't have a strong opinion either way. It's just sort of playing on my mind. And I think it's something that they may have to work through, especially early in the season, while both of these guys are acclimating, for different reasons. One high school to college jump, one new role, higher level college jump. I think there may be some time required there, but it's just something to watch.
Table that, because we will get to the strengths and weaknesses of this room or of this group at the end. And I think that's certainly a valid, might slide it into a weakness maybe early and potentially a strength later. But I'm going to talk about Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com. Go see him on Franklin Street. I was there ahead of the TCU game. Johnny T-Shirt was popping. Franklin Street in general was just nuts. You can always get in Johnny T-Shirt and see what you need to get Carolina related. Of course, basketball season's around the corner. I know Sherrell McMillan will make his couple $100 stop at Johnny T-Shirt, and what he'll be able to do is, since he's part of Inside Carolina and you can be part of Inside Carolina Premium, folks, you can get 10% off. And 10% off of what Sherrell McMillan spends in there is a lot of money. You can buy some Jordans with all that money that Sherrell McMillan saves with his 10% off at Johnny T-Shirt. But go see him. They're alumni-owned and operated. Great customer service, either online or in person at JTS. Okay, who we got left? We have Seth Trimble. Seth Trimble is probably before – I don't know if I would say Evans or Trimble or the number one guys, but Evan, I'm going to let you come in on it. I still think Kyan Evans is the one to watch and the one that's needed the most in this room or in this group or in this position. But you got Seth Trimble out of the gate, and then we'll all talk about him.
Yeah, if you mean like need the most as in maybe the most unexpected, I think I can see where Evans comes to that. I think the thing with Seth is been nice to see over his college career is you've seen significant improvement year after year. Last year became more of a little bit more of a consistent score, especially in the paint. You saw a little bit better body control when he got into the air. There were times still where you didn't know if he really knew what he was going to do once he got up into the air, but that seemed to be more of a problem of sophomore Seth than junior Seth. I think the big thing with Seth coming into this year is you're going to see the first time in his college career that he's penciled in as a starter, and there's really no way besides barring a crazy injury that he's out of the starting lineup. And it's interesting to see how that's going to play in with Seth's confidence, because that's something we've always heard since he's been at UNC is, his confidence has been up and down, whether it's how he's performing, whether it's, he had a concussion or an injury that kind of set him back in the middle of the season. It's kind of been an up and down thing for Seth. And people have been able to see, like, when Seth has the confidence, when he has the freedom to kind of play without any second guessing, you see the performance that he had against Memphis in the exhibition, or you see kind of how he helped lead some of those big comebacks UNC had last season. The game against Dayton comes to mind. The comeback against Duke in the ACC tournament where he's, full court pressing. He has the ability, just with his defensive versatility and his strength at his size, to completely flip games around when it comes to just full court press and things like that. The thing with Seth this year, obviously, is you still don't know what the jump shot's going to be. You saw as a sophomore, he shot, pretty efficiently on super low volume. And then last season he had, at the beginning of the year, he was shooting a lot better from three, and that really kind of tinkered down toward the middle of the year and into ACC conference play. So it's obviously you still have questions about the jump shot. And then the other thing that Seth is going to have to adjust to, kind of similar to Kyan, is he's also going to have to be a primary ball handler and an initiator of some sorts. And, more so even than Kyan Evans, Seth has really never been an initiator or a playmaker in college. I mean, he's a guy that averaged, less than, I think, 1.5 assists a game last year. So those are all things that, are going to have to play out and see how they eventually work. But when it comes to Seth, you're going to be getting a strong defender, an elite athlete at his size, a guy that once he gets into the paint can be really efficient. But someone who definitely, has question marks when it comes to the shooting, and then obviously when it comes to the playmaking, which I think are two things that this team, is really going to need from him.
Rob, is Seth Trimble a point guard? Can he be? Not, I don't think in the traditional way we think of Carolina point guards, but can he accomplish that?
I'd be okay with him doing it for 6 or 8 minutes a game. I'd be worried if it went above that. And we talked about this on a different show, but I think if he's doing that for 15 minutes per game, I think it will damage what he does defensively and some of the other things he brings to the table, because he would really have to max effort to be a point guard. It's not a natural thing for him. What I do think he can do, and I think may be important, this sort of relates to the question I was asking before. Say the initial play breaks down. I assume they'll continue to use a lot of structure. It's been a hallmark of the Hubert Davis era. Let's say the first action fails. Then I think Trimble comes through as the secondary ball handler and the playmaker at the end of the shot clock, especially if Evans and Dixon or whoever else is unable to be a creative playmaker, under 10 seconds to go. That's where I think you could see Trimble get a high ball screen at the top of the floor, and they say, okay, you have to make a play. May not be ideal, but I think that could be a really important role for this team. Generally speaking, I think they have to do better with their second option on a given possession. That's something they've struggled with. It was a massive issue last year. First play breaks down, you get a lot of standing and dribbling. Can they more seamlessly transition into something that's decent if the first play doesn't work? That's where I think Seth Trimble could really shine as an on-ball player.
Sherrell, get in on Seth here. Rob makes some great points there. Seth's been, to be a 4-year player at a school these days is, at least the same school, is not very popular these days with guys. He's been there. How big an impact does that? How, him being the veteran leader, having been through the wars, been through basically with Hubert the whole time, virtually the whole time. Your thoughts here on Trimble, maybe his growth as being a senior leader. Obviously off the court, he's done some impressive things, but on the court, what's he going to bring this senior year that we have not seen before?
I think it is the leadership piece. He was Hubert Davis' second high school commitment behind Will Shaver back in the summer of 2022. And he's shown a willingness, even though it's interesting because he's shown kind of, to me, like the ultimate willingness to buy in, even though he's considered leaving a couple times. And again, that's kind of where college basketball is right now. But he's been in there for Hubert Davis, kind of in the trenches, as the kids say. And I think the biggest thing for him this year really is going to be about consistency, because we've seen how good Seth can be in spades. There's stretches of games. I think Rob said this too, not just the Memphis game, but really the Maui trip. Like, he was phenomenal. He was a really good player. And then kind of once they got back on mainland, Alabama hits and everything starts to go downhill a little bit. But then he has a great second half against Florida, and you're thinking, okay, here comes Seth. And then he gets a concussion, and then it's just hard for him to be consistent throughout the year. So I think they don't need superstar Steph that was there last year, and they also can't afford the Seth that at times was hesitant to take shots, didn't look confident in his drives to the rim, was fading away against contact. They don't need that either. They just need solid consistency, and I think that's really hard to do. I think people don't understand how hard that is to do, to be the same person every single game, no matter who's defending you, no matter who you're defending. So for me, that is the thing that I'm looking for him this year, is just, more singles and more doubles, not as many home runs and not as many strikeouts. And I think that'll help UNC a ton, especially as, like Rob said, Dixon and Evans are going to have to take some time, I think, to come online to the best version of themselves. So if he can be consistent and his defense can can stay at an elite level, because I think there were times last year where there was some slippage. So if it can get back to that uber elite level, then I think he'll give Carolina everything he needs, in addition to that leadership component of being, the fourth year senior, the guy who's been around, who's done everything, who's seen everything.
Rails baseball and stuff rivals Greg Barnes' golf analogies. I mean, you just need more doubles. He needs to lead the league in doubles if you're Seth Trimble in North Carolina, and not in those other categories. Talking
be Bo Bichette. Don't be, Ohtani. You don't have to be Ohtani. You can just be lead the league in hits, get on base, have a good OPS, do that kind of thing. You don't have to be the superstar. And I think, just to expound the point a little bit, that was one of the issues I think the Carolina team had last year, is that you could see at times so many guys were just kind of in takeover mode, and that at times you need that, and it's good because I think, I'm sure we're going to talk about it on weakness, but sometimes you just have to get the ball to somebody and say, we need a basket, go get it. But that does not work consistently over time when everyone is trying to do it on the same team. And so I think the hope this year is that Seth and the other guards will be able to kind of understand who's got it flowing, who likes the ball in a certain spot, who likes it here, and and really play more as a cohesive unit. Not saying that they didn't all last season, but there were times that it looked severely disjointed. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But I think if you can eliminate some of that and get more cohesiveness, that can make up for some of the limitations that the backcourt may have.
Well, the best ability is availability. One of the best traits as a basketball player is consistency. And there was, to your point, there was a lot of watch this moments for this North Carolina team last year that did not really work out. Rob, let's kick it over to weaknesses here, and we'll kind of go around the horn. Evan, you follow Rob. I think weaknesses, we've hit on them right there for this group. But your take, because I think the way teams that are on these schedules, they're going to play to the weaknesses of North Carolina. So what are those weaknesses that you see right now?
I mean, for me, it starts with primary ball handling and playmaking. It's not just a passing and court vision issue. Can someone handle the pressure of a really good opponent that comes out and attacks them? And that's a problem that Carolina hasn't had to face because they've had such good ball handlers. An area that last year's team was good was turnover percentage. And when you have Cadeau and Davis, as ball dominant as they could be, harmfully at times, to Sherrell's point, but you didn't have to worry about who's dribbling. I mean, that was not a problem. I think these guys will have to show they can handle that type of pressure. I'm optimistic about that one. I still think having someone, I mentioned already the word vertical, because what no one wants to see is a return to the 2023 offense with a lot of passing and dribbling around the perimeter, and the ball doesn't ever go inside, whether with the dribble or the pass. And so what I will be looking for early, especially and against the better opponents, is can any of these guys play in high ball screens? And if they aren't great at it, are they going to change the offense? I mean, I think the question is dynamic in the sense that what could be a weakness playing the way last year's team did may not be as big a weakness on this team if they construct the offense differently. I'm not optimistic about either Evans or Dixon or Trimble being someone you would spam high ball screens for, because I don't think that's their game. But you don't have to play that way. If they play in a style that's more based on ball movement and player movement, like the old days, I mean, you could have a Previs type backcourt, and that was okay. And I still think that type of thing can work, but you have to drill it and specialize at it. And I'm hopeful that they will. But that's sort of in the background too, as we're talking about potential weaknesses. It really will depend on how they play, and of course individually how they translate. But I think that's at the outset for me. I'm looking for ball handling and playmaking, not just as passers, but as dribblers, beating someone off the dribble, getting to the rim, and breaking a defense down. Those are my primary questions to start.
Evan?
Oh, am I mute?
You
No, I'm
were
not.
muted.
Sorry.
You were muted. That's
kind of what Rob. Was I muted?
You started to talk.
Gosh. Kind of what Rob was saying. When it comes to the creation point, something I found very just interesting looking back at some of the numbers was the 3 guys coming in who have college experience. So you got Kyan Evans, or 3 total guys who have college experience, not necessarily coming in, are Kyan Evans, Seth Trimble, and Jaydon Young. And those guys have 300 career assists combined. And Elliot Cadeau in 2 seasons at UNC had 381 assists. So there's a lot of ground to be made up in terms of just where the playmaking comes from and where, the initiation of this offense can be found. And then I think the other interesting thing, kind of building off just the playing vertical point, is when there is, a low shot clock, down to 5, 6, 7 seconds, is there a guard in this room that you trust to create their own offense, be a one-on-one scorer? I think last year you saw, obviously RJ Davis had the ability, to get into his own offense. Elliot Cadeau, had the speed and the creativity to where, he could blow by. There were times last year where it seemed like Elliot Cadeau was unguardable when it came to just blow bys and getting to the rim late in shot clocks. I don't know if this backcourt has it. And Kyan Evans, again, has never been really a true on the ball creator. He's definitely benefited from, playing next to a gifted player. Seth Trimble is a player I think more so, has thrived, in transition and has shown flashes of the ability to create on his own, but not necessarily been that consistent creator. And then obviously with Dixon and Young, Dixon, you don't really know coming from high school, and then Young has just never really been asked to do that at a school like UNC. So I think those really 2 main weaknesses that jump out is obviously just the raw numbers of the playmaking. Where are those assists going to come from? And then just, when it does get late in the shot clock, is there a guard in this room that you can consistently rely on to create their own offense individually, which I think is something that we'll have to see what happens when the season starts.
Sherrell, you got a challenge here being different than Rob and Evan. One thing that I wonder is throwing entry passes. A lot of people want to talk about Carolina didn't play inside out at all. Well, there were times last year where they had guys posted up on occasion and they never saw the ball or never got it in the right spot over the last few years. But this unit here, to Evan's point, to Rob's point, now Sherrell, add your point. What do you see as the weakness here?
No, I have to agree. I think you can make the argument that this is the biggest question mark on the entire team, is the idea of creation, of, as Rod said, kind of verticality, of late clock, one-on-one. Can someone go get you a bucket when you need it? Now, it sounds contradictory because I was just saying how last year they were doing that too much, but you need a balance. And I think those are all huge questions, and we just won't know the answer, honestly, for some time. I think an even bigger question, it's not necessarily a weakness, but a bigger question is what Rob said, is that, is the offense going to look different? Because, in talking to people during the portal season, one thing that was made clear is that, they started off, they wanted like kind of more of a traditional point guard. And I think the offers and the interest that you saw them make, Nate George specifically, who ended up at Syracuse, reflected that. And after George decided to kind of go to Syracuse at the last minute, I think there was a shift in their thinking in that, okay, not necessarily to moneyball it, but like you don't have to replace Cadeau and RJ Davis 1-to-1. Can you get a really good player in the backcourt who has strengths, and can you kind of tailor what you do around that? So I think that is one of the reasons that I guess I'm somewhat optimistic that there will be some offensive philosophy changes, because when they got Evans out of the portal, it was kind of an understanding that it was going to have to look different because his skills are not Elliot Cadeau's skills and they're not Nate George's skills. So to me, that was kind of a foreshadowing of there's going to be something different. What that is, again, we won't know until the season starts. But I think you have to answer the biggest weakness question by also talking about, will the offense change? And like Rob said, they're kind of intertwined.
And is there faith and belief that the offense will significantly change? Because to your point, if it does not, I think this team struggles. But we'll find out when the season rolls around.
And maybe not even significantly. Maybe it's just like, just get the ball across half court and figure out the rest. Maybe it's something like that where they go into a free-flowing motion offense. And now it would be, completely different from what Hubert Davis has done for his 4 years as head coach. But, I think desperate times call for desperate measures. And when you have a roster that has the skill set that this has, you need to make sure that you're putting people in positions to succeed. And putting Kyan Evans and Derek Dixon and Seth Trimble in the same exact roles that you had Ian Jackson, RJ Davis, and Elliot Cadeau just isn't putting them in positions to succeed. So we'll see what happens. But I think you have to think about that question when you're talking about weaknesses.
Rob Harrington, we're going to switch it to some positivity. We're going to talk strengths with this unit. I think shooting, just watching from my late eyes, I think shooting will be much better. But Rob, you take the strengths here for the I always want to say the position room, but for the Carolina guards.
Tommy, if you bring room terminology to basketball, we're gonna go to Johnny T-shirt and see if they sell muzzles, and we're gonna find.
Oh, I'll just see. So I cannot replace y'all's usual host, but hey,
every time that someone says room, I don't know who started that, but I lament that they did it. But yes, I am really excited about this team's potential to shoot the ball well, and it's hard to say this without criticizing last year's guys, but I think these guys will play more unselfishly, and not just a matter of being selfish, but I think the style will be more aesthetically pleasing to longtime Carolina people like myself, who like passing and like player movement. And you can't really have Elliot Cadeau and RJ Davis and ask them not to dribble, because that's how they play. Caleb Love plays that way. He went to Arizona. He played the same way. That's who he is. And I think now they've gotten away from that. Finally, they have the personnel to do something that looks different. The 2024 team melded together really quickly. And so my optimistic take is, well, something like that could happen where guys just kind of mesh well. You wouldn't have thought, I didn't think, that Ingram and Ryan would be complementary, because sort of like I was raising the question earlier, I thought, well, neither of these guys is real explosive. Neither of them is really that creative as a ball handler. I didn't appreciate, how well Harrison Ingram could play bully ball. So that's one where I got wrong, but and it just worked because they played together well. They got each other's games. This is where we go back to what Sherrell was talking about with Dixon's immense pedigree at all levels. I think he'll kind of get his teammates, even for a freshman. And I'm very much eager to watch how that works. I think Evans, having been a complimentary guy and someone who gets his stuff done without dribbling a ton or having led an offense, I don't think that's the worst thing, because he knows that he can be effective without relying on a ton of high ball screens and dribbling. So I think as a strength, you have a lot of more lower D democratic offensive possessions where any number of guys can hurt you several different ways, instead of the predictability of having a Davis or Cadeau where it's sort of your turn, my turn. I think they finally can get away from that, and I'm really happy to watch it. I believe that they'll make changes to the offense. I think now they genuinely can, in a way that can be effective and play to these guys' strengths.
Evan, your take on the point guard and lead guard and combo guard and shooting guard positions for North Carolina basketball strengths?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think the big strength is the shooting. I think another thing that I wouldn't necessarily tab as a strength of this group, but just something that I think could be refreshing is the positional size. You're not going to see a backcourt where you've got a guy in RJ Davis who's 6 foot and a guy in Elliot Cadeau who's 6'1". You've got solid positional size. It's not elite by any means. This isn't Duke of last year where you're rolling out 6'6" guards. And one of the guards looks like he could play middle linebacker, but you're not going to see many cases where it's outside of really Kyan Evans. All these guys in the guard, I guess I was about to say guard room, the guard position group, are of solid build, of solid height. They have good wingspans, good strength, etc. So I think that's one thing that just is going to jump out pretty quickly when you watch this team. Is last year you always saw, whether it was when you're watching the game or even when they would flash the graphic of like the starting lineups, and you see 6 foot and 6'1" off the bat, it just kind of puts you at a disadvantage when it comes to just some things you're limited to do, whether it's defensively or even offensively. I don't think that's going to be the case with this team. You've got Kyan Evans who's 6'2", and then obviously Dixon 6'5", and 6'4" and 6'4" with or 6'4" and 6'3" with Trimble and Young. So you're just going to see just more, just I guess, average in a way, positional size with this group, which I think after so many years of watching, at least having one guard who's at 6 foot, or even you could argue RJ is probably a little bit shorter than 6 foot. It'll be refreshing for UNC fans to kind of see a guard room where there isn't a guy who's going to necessarily get picked on defense because of his size.
Sherrell McMillan, the calm in the midst of the storm over the last few years, the person I always go to not just sports-related calmness, but life-related calmness. Sherrell, strengths of this group for North Carolina: Trimble, Young, Evans, Dixon, and Dennis. What do they bring to the table strength-wise that North Carolina fans need to pay attention to and need to look for as the season gets started?
Let me start by saying I got y'all all fooled, because I'm at home. I'm running around like crazy after these two girls. So if I seem calm, I guess it's projecting on these podcasts. What I really think about this group of guards, Evan talked about it with positional size. I think they can be good defensively, because we keep going back to Dixon's pedigree over and over. But in addition to that, he's he's built like a college player already and has been for some time. So he's not going to be taken advantage of, like we've seen happen several times over the last years, where is essentially a clear out for the opposing team's guards. They take Carolina's guards into the post and make something happen. I don't think that will be as prevalent this year. I think we've seen Trimble kind of acquit himself well as a defender the last few years. We expect that to maintain or get even better. And talking with Earl Watson, we did a story on IC. Earl Watson, who trained Kyan Evans this summer, it was surprising because he talked about how strong Evans was. And if you just kind of look at him from a distance, you're like, huh, that's interesting. I wouldn't expect him to be strong. But Watson, who's a former NBA head coach, former player, just raved about his strength and his ability defensively, because of the way that he's really smart when it comes to rotations, and he's really good with help side defense. All those nuances that maybe my basketball mind can't understand, but Earl was really talking it up. So I think there's that. And then Young, we already talked about how he's kind of got a wide receiver, tight end build already. So you've got strong guards. You've got tall guards. Again, Dennis 6'5". You've got Trimble, who's an athletic guard. So I think defensively that could really be a strength. And then the other thing that could be a strength to me, it sounds counterintuitive because we're not sure about their ball handling, but I think closing out games with these guys shooting free throws, Evans was up around 85% last year. Trimble improved to close to 83. Dixon's numbers, if I recall from EYBL, they weren't great, but you would expect that to improve overall. And if those are the three who are playing the lion's shares of the minutes, then you would expect that they would be able, if Carolina's up 5 or 6, 7, in the last 3 or 4 minutes, that they would go to the free throw line and take care of business and help the Hills get out with the win. So I think those two things are potential strengths for this team from the guards: free throw shooting and the ability to kind of be versatile defensively against all other types of guards.
Earl Watson reference, it was a great story on Inside Carolina. If folks haven't read it, need to go back and find it. But he was on those teams that Carolina played back in the late 90s. He played for UCLA. And if my memory serves, and it might not have been him, but I think he ran over the late, great J.B. Sissel at a game he and I were covering back in the Smith Center. I can't remember, but it was one of those UCLA guards that just totally wiped JB out as JB was on the side. I got run over by Peppers in one of those games. So once upon a time, used to sit on the floor covering basketball games. It was nice there. Rob, final thoughts here on the room. I know you had a bit of trivia you wanted to share, but also just sort of wrapping this one up in a bow, and shout out to you guys for joining. This is a scouting the guards. The North Carolina guards are going to go three-part series, cover the entire team. But Rob, close us out on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched all around it. I think this particular group of players, these two positions, will largely dictate what this team does. I think they have a much higher floor than they're being given credit for if they're able to make it work, both if the players are ready and they are able to scheme to them effectively, this team will be good. And the ceiling rises too, but I think this is a lot of a floor issue for me, because you have sort of a threshold question about playmaking, all the things that we've talked about. I think if they get good answers there, you don't have to worry about this team falling out of the rank category. We're not have to, Tommy, you and I aren't post game going to be talking about a lot of metric movement and nonsense around ninth seed versus 12th seed versus missing it. We can put that to bed for the year if they get good guard play. Then the questions sort of go to the front court. Are you a top 20 team or are you a top 10 team? That's that difference. But for me, if they get good answers in the backcourt, this is a ranked team, no stress making the tournament, probably with a decent seed. I am optimistic by nature. I think they can get there. I don't think it will probably look great in November again, and it probably will cause some panic. But I think this group of players, hopefully with better chemistry in a system that is designed for them, I think they will improve rapidly. I'm expecting to see a genuinely good team with good backcourt play by mid-December.
A lot of meat in those Rob Harrington comments right there discussing North Carolina's guards. Shout out to Sherrell, Rob, and Evan on this show. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt. This is Scouting UNC Guards. Next up in a couple weeks, we'll be scouting the wings and then scouting the big men. We'll come a little bit later here at Inside Carolina. As always, if you're an Inside Carolina Premium subscriber, you get all of Sherrell McMillan's hard work on the recruiting side of it. All of these articles and podcasts, of course, you can find. But if you really want what you need to get from Inside Carolina, go to InsideCarolina.com, join up at the new On3 network, rate, review, subscribe, and all. And stay tuned for more content from Inside Carolina, covering the Tar Heels football, basketball, baseball, Olympic sports, and everything you can get Carolina over at Inside Carolina. Everybody stay safe.